Hi, this is Kevin Bullard with Marriage Works, and I'd like to welcome you to the webinar titled Sweet. We're married. Now what? I'm excited about this webinar because we're going to talk about 3 different bonds that are absolutely critical to a marriage. Now, these bonds are critical to a marriage that has been together for 50 years, but here's the thing. These bonds mature over time, and if you don't start nursing these bonds and growing and developing these bonds early in your marriage, then you're probably not going to make it to 50 years, just to be honest with you. From my observation, if you don't nurse these bonds early on in marriage, chances are you're not even going to make it to 5 years, just because there's going to be so much distance between you and your mate in different areas. There's likely to be friction, distrust, and quite frankly, you just aren't going to get along. You hear so often people talking about irreconcilable differences whenever they're getting divorced. And if I'm honest, I'll tell you that irreconcilable differences really come about because of a lack of the 3 bonds we're going to talk about tonight. So I get it. You're excited that you got married. I mean, big times. It was a great wedding. The honeymoon was spectacular. You're so excited. You're experiencing a lot of first experiences. You're doing a lot of things together. Maybe you bought your first house together. You got your first car. There are just a whole lot of cool experiences that happen when you're newlywed. Now, at the same time, there are some challenges that come along. And maturing the bonds that we're going to talk about certainly help you know how to handle these challenges. And they also give you an opportunity to develop the bonds in the midst of these challenges. And so let's go ahead and jump into these. Now, the bonds that we are talking about are the emotional bond, the physical bond, and the spiritual bond. Again, the emotional bond, the physical or the sexual bond, and the spiritual bond. Now, you're going to see in your study guide that on your listening guide, that I interchanged the word physical and sexual, but they're going to mean the same thing with this particular lesson. So let's first of all talk about the emotional bond. The emotional bond is essential, and you're going to find that if the emotional bond does not reach its peak, or if it doesn't develop, then it will keep the sexual and the spiritual bonds from reaching their peak. Now, here's the first element to an emotional bond, having a strong emotional bond with your mate. It's accountability. What is accountability? Accountability at the end of the day is just responsibility. When you are accountable to your mate, what you are signaling is, I will be responsible for what I vowed at our wedding ceremony. I will be responsible for what I committed to do. I told you the other day I was going to do such and such. Well, you know what? If I'm going to be accountable, that simply means I'm going to be responsible to take care of such and such, like I said. Now, here's the thing. Accountability works a couple of ways. Number one, you've got to hold yourself accountable, all right? You've just got to be a big boy. You've got to be a big girl, and you say, you know what? I said I was going to do this, and so help me God, I am going to do this, just like I said. Now, here's the other thing about accountability. Accountability doesn't work if you will not allow your spouse or others to hold you accountable. Now, I hope that makes sense to you. So often we want to hold ourselves accountable, but we don't want our mate to hold us accountable. But when you want to allow your mate to hold you accountable, then you know what? That emotional bond just doesn't form, because your mate kind of feels like, well, he or she is a rogue, and they're trying to hold me accountable. He's trying to hold me accountable, but he won't let me hold him accountable. She's telling me what to do, and she's asked me about a commitment I made here, but she won't let me ask her about it. And so when you will not allow your mate to hold you accountable, you do not develop an emotional bond. You just can't do it. If there's any emotional bond that develops, it's probably one of distaste, one of detest, because you won't let your mate do for you what you're doing to him or her. So this accountability piece is huge when it comes to developing an emotional bond. It's responsibility of what you vowed, responsibility to what you committed to do, holding yourself responsible, and allowing your spouse to hold you responsible. Now, sure, you want your spouse to come to you in a way that is respectful, in a way that is loving, in a way that is kind and courteous, but you've also just got the period. You got to let your spouse come to you. And even if your spouse does not approach you in a way that you appreciate, if your spouse does not approach you in a way that you think is respectful, here's the big thing. You've got to mature to a place spiritually where you can still receive correction even if your spouse does not want you to. You got to mature to this place. Excuse me. You've got to mature to this place spiritually where you can accept correction from your spouse even when he or she does not do it the right way. So I hope that makes sense to you. So that's the first element in an emotional bond: accountability. Here's the second: compassion. Compassion is important in developing an emotional bond because if your spouse doesn't feel like you care for him or her, or if your spouse doesn't feel like you're concerned about his or her welfare, then it's going to be difficult for your spouse to extend their side of the emotional bridge, if you will. If you'll imagine, and if you're with your spouse right now, how about you do this? The two of you just kind of stand up and get in front of each other and stretch your arms out and grab each other's hands and then grab each other's forearms. And so you're standing across from each other and you've kind of built this bridge. You've got this emotional bridge right now. Now, let the hands go and the two of you just kind of back up. And so now there should be a gap in between your hands. This gap is formed when there is no compassion in the marriage. And so you've got this gap, you've got this emotional gap here now. And so if you actually follow through and did that exercise, thank you, you can sit down back in front of the computer now. But here's the thing. There is an emotional distance. There is an emotional gap when compassion is missing. I love this proverb. It says, what is desired in a man is kindness. If I'm not mistaken, that is Proverbs chapter 20, verse 6. What is desired in a man is kindness. That is so critical. What we all want from our mate is to show us concern, is to show us kindness, is to be nice, to show us compassion. Compassion simply means that you are in touch with the misfortune of your spouse. If your spouse is ill, or if your spouse is going through a rough time, or he or she hasn't had a good day, or maybe there's some emotional issue going on, whatever the case may be, compassion simply means you are tuned in and you are doing all you can do to help. Maybe you can't fix it. Maybe just listening and being there is all you can do. But you know what? If your spouse knows you can't fix it, then you just being there and listening will be enough to make him or her feel like you care. And you know what you're doing? You are connecting emotionally. You are bonding emotionally. You're going through a shared experience. It may be something bad, but even in shared experiences, you can form a bond that is good for the marriage. And so those are the first two key elements: accountability and compassion. Let's look at the third one. Trust. Trust is very important to forming an emotional bond, because without trust, you can forget about there being emotional bond, emotional intimacy. You can just forget about it. If your spouse feels like that he or she cannot trust you, then there will be distance and coldness between the two of you. Now, maybe even here in your young marriage, you've experienced this, where you've done something or you've breached a trust, or maybe your spouse has breached a trust, and emotionally you've just shut down. You're just like, you know what? I'm just not having it. I don't feel like I can trust you. I remember working with a couple one time, and they were planning to get married, and one of the spouses, the wife to be, felt like she could not trust her husband to be, and so you know what she said? We need to pump the brakes. We need to take a little chill pill. We need to call off the wedding for right now, and we just need to wait, because before I marry you, I need to feel like I can trust you. If your spouse feels like he or she cannot trust you, then you are certainly weakening the emotional bond in the relationship. And so how do you do this? Well, you've got to be honest from Jump Street. You got to be honest. If you've already breached a trust, then your words are going to have to start matching up with your actions. Here's another thing that has to happen. You're going to have to give your spouse time and a reason to trust you. If you have broken your trust with your spouse and your spouse feels like he or she can't trust you, it's not enough for you to say, hey, you can trust me. Just come on, and I promise I'm not going to do it again. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. You have to rebuild trust. We've got another webinar that we've done on rebuilding trust, and I like to say that just like you have a credit score, you have a trust score. And when you first get with your spouse, your trust score may be we'll just use credit terms. Your trust may be an 800 when you first get with your spouse, and you're telling your spouse the truth, and all these things are good. But if you start lying, or if there's an affair, or whatever the case may be, whatever you do to dent the trust, your trust score goes down, just like your credit score goes down when you aren't paying your bills, or there's slow pays, or whatever the case may be. And so if your trust score is a 500, you don't tell the truth once and then immediately your trust score hops back up to an 800. No, you're going to have to build your trust score methodically. You're going to have to tell the truth over and over and over. And you cannot rush a trust score. Your spouse has emotions, and if those emotions have been ruined, if those emotions have been shut down, if they've been closed, it's going to take some time for your spouse to feel like that he or she can be vulnerable and trust you again. And so if your trust score has taken a hit, what you're going to have to do is just make sure that there is a parallel between what you say and what you do, and you're going to have to give it some time. And if you're the one who has been hurt, you're going to have to give your spouse an opportunity to rebuild trust. Maybe you don't open up, and you're probably not going to open up and let your spouse into the most sensitive areas of your heart right away, but you do have to make a concerted effort to let your spouse rebuild that trust score. It's very important if you're going to develop emotional intimacy or an emotional bond in your marriage. And so to review, there's accountability, there's compassion, and there's trust. And if you'll look at that, if you'll take the first letter of each of those three words, you'll see the word act. You cannot simply build an emotional bond in your marriage by words. It's going to have to be done through your actions. Actions help build an emotional bond. It's very important. Accountability, compassion, and trust. All right, let's move on to the next bond. This sexual or physical bond is huge in marriage. God created sex for marriage. That's one of the things I am preaching to my kids. God created sex for marriage. And in many marriages, sex is it's just not there, and it happens for many reasons. And so what I want to do here is, in this section, I want to give you the description of a couple with a healthy sexual bond. And just like the emotional bond, this is something that starts early on in marriage. You've got to start this now. So here's the first thing. A couple that has a healthy physical or sexual bond has discussed their sexual history. There's a questionnaire that Cecilia, my wife Cecilia, and I use for couples, and it goes into just like great detail about the couple's sexual history. And I remember reading one of these for a couple, and holy cow, I was shocked at some of the questions. I mean, the questions that ask you, how many sexual partners have you had? At what age? What did you think about the sexual experience? Do you have any sexually transmitted diseases? What did your parents teach you about sex? What did you hear about sex growing up? What are your attitudes about sex? I mean, the questions were boundless, and it was almost like I felt like at times I was imposing on this couple. But let me tell you this, all right? By the time this couple finished this questionnaire on their sexual history, they should not have had any questions about who the other had sex with, at what age, what they thought about it, if there were any sexual molestations, or any of that stuff, what the parents thought about sex, what they were taught about sex growing up. Here's the thing. If you're going to have a healthy sexual bond, and particularly if you have had an expansive sexual history or extensive sexual history, you need to let your spouse know. Now, hear me. I am not saying that you need to go into every grave detail. I mean, in some ways, I think that questionnaire may have asked too much, right? Because I'm not trying to cause a fight between you and your mate. But here's the thing. You need to discuss your sexual history. Why? Because you don't want something happening later on in your marriage and your spouse is like, how long have you known about this? If there are any STIs, you want to talk about it. If there is some sexual relationship in the past and it has the potential to come back and bite your marriage in the butt later, then you know what? You probably want to talk about that. You don't want to leave anything uncovered that can come back and hamper your marriage later. If you do, it is going to destroy that sexual bond, which is going to impact the emotional bond, and that is going to impact the spiritual bond. Let's keep moving. A couple that has a healthy sexual bond has been honest about their sexual preferences. By sexual preferences, I am talking about how you like to have sex, if you're interested in using any sex toys, oral sex, anal sex, masturbation. Now listen, I am not going to sit here on the other side of this computer screen and tell you what you should be doing in your marriage, all right? I will give you this much, and I'm still in the thunder for myself. Part of it is you need to honor your spouse sexually. Whatever your spouse's sexual preferences are, you need to honor them. Do not force, again, I will say, do not force your mate to do anything he or she does not want to do. Why not? Because you're going to destroy the sexual bond in your marriage if you do. If your spouse is not into anal sex or oral sex or masturbation or watching pornography or sex toys, then you know what? You're just going to have to accept that, and you need to honor your mate. Now, maybe your mate is into that stuff, but you're not. Here's the thing. You need to talk about that, and once again, you have to honor your mate's sexual preferences. I remember getting an email one time from a new husband, and he was telling me about his wife. He was a virgin when they got married, and she had been around the block quite a few times actually, to hear him tell it, and she was very experienced, and there were so many things that she wanted to do in the marriage, and he just wasn't comfortable with it. It didn't work for him. He felt like, you know what, this is too much. I'm not comfortable with this. And so I counseled him and said, listen, you need to let her know that even though she wants to do all this stuff, you don't feel comfortable with it. And here's the thing. So many times we can think that, well, my mate will be okay with this. I just need to do it a few times and then he or she will be all right with it. No, 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 no. That's not how it works. If your mate is not comfortable with something that you are attempting to do sexually or something that you're asking him to do sexually, to force your mate to do something like that is to dishonor your mate. It is to force yourself upon your mate. It is to really, you're violating your mate at that point. You're not acting like Christ. You aren't being kind anymore. You aren't being loving. Really, you are bullying your mate sexually. And you don't want to do those things. Those things just are not cool. That is a perfect way to destroy sexual intimacy in your marriage, emotional intimacy, spiritual intimacy. And whenever the sexual bonds are broken, gosh, any of these bonds are broken, it can take a while for them to recover, right? But take a while to recover from them. But that sexual one is huge. It is so much better for you to honor your mate's sexual preferences. Now, a couple that has a healthy sexual bond has erected sexual boundaries. And simply what I mean by that is they've established some sexual boundaries. This is what we're going to do. We're not going to do this. We're not bringing anybody into our bedroom, whether it be a real person or whether they be on a DVD or a web video or whatever. We're not bringing anybody else into our marriage. It could even be this. We're not going to share our sexual problems or our sexual experiences with other people outside of our marriage. We're just not bringing these people into our marriage. These are the boundaries that we are establishing sexually, and we will honor them together. Here's the next one. Folks who have a healthy sexual bond have a strong marriage outside the bedroom. This one is absolutely critical. Said another way, you cannot build a healthy, strong, vibrant marriage on your sex life. Now, granted, you may have the most banging sex life in the world, right? I mean, you may just like fly home from work and you can't wait to have sex because your sexual relationship is just that good. If that's you, I tip my hat to you and I say, keep doing what you're doing. But here's the thing. If the health of your marriage is built on the health of your sex life, what are you going to do if something happens physically and you can't have sex the way you do now? What are you going to do if there is some type of health problem? What are you going to do whenever your spouse goes through menopause? What are you going to do if your spouse loses his or her sex drive? What are you going to do if there is erectile dysfunction? What are you going to do when your sex life, as good as it is now, you get to the point and you realize, oh my gosh, I'm having sex with the person that I've had sex with for the past 15 years, and you know what? I'm kind of bored now. What are you going to do if you build your marriage on the back of your sex life and your sex life takes a dive? You're going to be up the creek without a paddle, and you're going to find that your marriage is no longer as fulfilling as it used to be. That's why you've got to make sure that your marriage is strong outside the bedroom. If you have a strong marriage outside the bedroom, then the sexual excitement is only going to add to the marriage. But also get this. If you have a strong marriage outside the bedroom, if your sexual life is not as robust as you would like it to be, if it is not as good as you'd like it to be, or for health reasons you just can't perform sexually the way that you would like, if you have a strong marriage outside the bedroom, then the strength of your marriage builds a strong enough foundation for your marriage to still thrive in the midst of sexual challenges. That's why it is so important that you have a strong marriage outside the bedroom. Let's keep moving. I covered this one earlier when I was talking about sexual preferences, but you've got to honor your mate sexually. There must be sexual honor. If your spouse says no, then that means no. If your spouse says he or she doesn't feel secure or safe, then you've got to stop what you're doing. You've got to honor your mate sexually. You never want to violate your mate's conscience. If your mate does some type of sexual act with you, and he or she feels like that they're sinning or violating their conscience, that is not good for them. That is not good for you. That is not good for your marriage. So you must show sexual honor to your mate. That is a sign of a couple with a healthy sexual bond. And then finally, you've got to commit yourself to getting whatever help that you may need to take care of any issues that are affecting your sex life. I've named a few medical issues that could happen that could affect your sex life. Here's another one. It could be depression. It could be obesity. I mentioned ED. It could be anything that hampers your sex life. Commit yourself to getting the help that you need. I mentioned earlier that maybe there was some molestation when you were younger. Please go to a licensed counselor and get the help you need if it is negatively impacting the sex life in your marriage. Maybe it was a sexual relationship from a previous marriage or a previous relationship, and you find that now it is impacting your marriage relationship. Please get the help you need. I have some friends, Aaron and Jennifer Smith. You may be familiar with them. Jennifer is the blogger behind Unveiled Wife, which is just absolutely huge. She's got a couple of great books. And she writes about, in her book, The Unveiled Wife, about how sex was painful for she and her husband, Aaron, and so they just stopped doing it. And they both actually wound up turning to pornography because they weren't having sex with one another. And she found out after just years of pain and years of like not liking sex and having that sexual and emotional distance from her husband Aaron, she found out that the product she was using had I believe had parabens in it, and that was causing her to ache physically whenever she and her husband attempted to have sex. But here's the thing. Even though they were having sexual problems, there was sexual dysfunction in a relationship, they did not quit. They didn't just settle and say, well, you know what? We're never going to have sex with one another. It's always going to be painful. So, you know what? Whatever. We're just going to turn to pornography and we're just going to be content with pornography. No. They kept getting the help they needed. They kept researching. They kept praying. They kept reaching out to others to get the help they needed. And that's what I'm encouraging you to do. If you find that there is a sexual problem in your marriage, do not be too ashamed nor be too prideful to get the help you need. Because if you don't work on it now, you're going to find that it is going to show up down the road in your marriage, and you do not want that. All right, so we've talked about two of these three critical bonds. There is the emotional bond, which is absolutely critical. Then there is the sexual bond. And now we get to the spiritual bond. The spiritual bond, I believe, is the most important, but here's the thing. If the spiritual bond, if the emotional and the sexual bond are not there, then it's going to disrupt the spiritual bond. But also look at this. If the spiritual bond is not there, then it also can wreak havoc on the sexual and the emotional. Now, I alluded to this illustration earlier in the listening guide. It's kind of like the oil, fuel, and coolant in a vehicle. All three of them work together inside the car, right? They're all vital to the car. You can have one, and you can have two of them and be missing one, and the car's not going to go anywhere. A car without fuel, but that has oil and coolant, is not going to move. A car without oil that has fuel and coolant is not going to go anywhere. You've got to have all three. All three are vital. And it's the same thing with this spiritual bond. And in John 15:5, Jesus said to his disciples, I am the vine and you are the branches. Without me, you can do nothing. Jesus wanted them to know that their relationship to him, their connectedness to him, was absolutely critical if they were going to be in a place where They were fruitful disciples. They were going to have to be connected to Him. His Word living in them abiding in His Word and abiding in the Spirit, and the Spirit of God abiding in them, and His Word's abiding in them. And it's the same with you in your marriage for the spiritual bond. Now, here's the first thing, the first way to develop a spiritual bond with your mate. You must pray for and with one another. Pray for one another. You don't have to be together to do this. You can pray for your mate at any time. You can pray for your mate right now. Now, here's the thing. Pray for and with. When you pray with your mate, this is taking it to the next level. And I really believe that praying with your mate is one of the most intimate things you can do, even more intimate than sex. And one of the things I recommend is before you have sex, pray. Pray about your sexual experience. So Tilly and I have done this. My friends Casey and Megan, who operate Marriage 365. Casey talks about how they would pray. He and Megan pray before they have sex, and just invite God's Spirit into the room. And that may seem kind of weird, but you got to keep in mind, God made your body. God made sex for marriage. And it is awesome when you pray and invite the Spirit of the living God to be in the room as you are making love, as you are manifesting His love in a physical way to your mate. It's a wonderful, just and spiritually and just it's a wonderful and intimate thing. So pray for your mate. Pray with your mate. Now maybe you're saying, well, Kevin, you don't know my mate. My mate doesn't even know Jesus. My mate's not going to pray with me. Well, you know what? If that's where it is, that's where it is. Still, you pray for your mate and offer to pray with your mate. Ask your mate, how can I pray for you? You don't have to beat him or her over the head. You don't have to bludgeon him with God's word or with prayer, but ask him. Or maybe you're saying, well, Kevin, my mate is intimidated whenever I want to pray with him or her. Maybe it's the wife, and what we've found is typically it's the wife who's the spiritual leader in the home, even though the husband is to be the spiritual leader in the home. Well, you know what? If your husband feels intimidated, then you pray for him, but you don't want to do anything that makes him feel intimidated unless the Lord's leading you, saying, hey, you need to pray with your husband. And maybe you're saying, well, you know what? My husband doesn't know the Lord. Or my husband's mad at me. My wife's mad at me, and they don't want me to pray with them. Well, if that's the case, you don't have to grab their hands and pray with them, but you can certainly leave them a note and say, you know what? I'm praying for you. I love you. Now, here's the thing that helps your mate to pray with you. You've got to be acting like a believer. If you're acting like an unbeliever and you're acting crazy and you're mistreating your spouse and doing all this stuff, yeah, don't expect your spouse to want to pray with you if you're acting like contrary to how someone should act who knows Jesus. Now, sure, we all sin, we all fall short of the glory of God. But I'm talking about if you're not acting like a practicing Christian, then your mate is going to have a tough time praying with you and accepting prayer from you. So just keep that in mind. Here's the next way to develop a spiritual bond with your mate. Attend worship together. If you go to the same church, that's wonderful. The most you can, sit together at church. There's something powerful about that. I'm familiar with churches where the husband and wife, maybe one or both of them is serving during the service, and so they don't get to sit together. And one of the things I committed myself to is like, you know what? Every time I can, I'm going to sit with my wife. Even if I have to break the protocol of the church and because then everybody else is not sitting with their wife, I don't care. I want to sit beside my wife. There's something powerful about that. We're learning together. We can exchange notes about the sermon together. There's just something powerful about attending worship together. If you and your spouse attend different churches, then, unless the Lord has absolutely told you, yeah, you go to this church and you go to this church, and consider what it's going to take for the two of you to attend church together. Or maybe once a month or twice a month, whatever, you're going to go to church with your spouse. There's just something powerful about attending church together. Plus, it shows to everybody else, yeah, that's my husband or that's my wife. he or she is taken by me, so don't come in here and try to step to them. They're mine. There's something powerful about showing up with your mate. So attend worship together. Again, don't badger your spouse, right? We're not going to bludgeon anybody. We're not going to guilt trip anybody. We're going to extend the invitation. We're going to pray, and we're going to trust the Spirit of God to soften our spouse's heart to get them to either pray with us or to attend worship with us. Here's the next thing you can do. Act your faith out through service. You're going to find that when you are volunteering with your spouse, whether in church or outside of church, it is powerful in creating a bond. The scripture says that faith without works is dead. So you want to act out your faith anyway. You want to live out your faith. That's part of worship, acting out and serving others, right? Serving others out of your heart. And when you can do it with your spouse, it is even more special. And it just really sends this message that, my mate and I are one, and we volunteered over here together. One of the things that Cecilia and I did, and we involved our kids, is when we lived in North Carolina, we would deliver food to families that were low income and needed the extra help every month. And we developed some fabulous relationships, and it helped us as a couple to see, now, gosh, we don't have everything we need, and we go through hard times, but man, look how fortunate we are. Look at how much we do have. And it made us grateful together, being able to act out our faith together and serve together. And it was also great with our kids for them to be able to see that, you know what? You don't just sit on the sidelines and say you're a believer. You have some skin in the game and you act your faith out. That is part of your reasonable service. It's part of how you worship God. All right, so that's the third way to develop a spiritual bond with your mate. Here's number 4. Spend time with other couples. In particular, spend time with other couples of the same faith. This can be done through like double dating, or even better, this can be done in a small group. What is that all about? Why is that so helpful? Number 1, you get to see your spouse in a different environment. You get to pour into another couple gets to pour into you. So, you've got some mutual discipleship going on. You've got some iron sharpening iron going on. Another thing is there's an opportunity for you and your mate to share where you are spiritually. Or if there are any problems that are going on, it's an opportunity for you and your mate to get the assistance that you need from somebody else. And so spending this time with other couples is powerful. It lets you see that you're not alone in the battles that you're fighting, but it also shows you, again, how blessed you are and how wonderful things are. You also get some aids and some tips and some suggestions on how to go through a situation that you're enduring. And it's just very powerful to spend time with other couples of the same faith, because you get strengthened in your faith individually and as a couple. And you've got somebody that you can call on during tough times. You know that, that's Ed and Sarah over there, and Ed and Sarah are our rock. They are great. They hold us accountable. We hold them accountable. And when we go through tough times as a couple, we know that Ed and Sarah are there to help us. And so spending time with other couples is vital. Here is the 5th way to develop a spiritual bond with your mate. Treat your mate the way Jesus treats you. And I'll tell you, this is the one that has just challenged me since day one of my marriage, and I imagine until Jesus takes me to glory, this one will continue to challenge me. If I am treating Cecilia the way that Jesus treats me, that is with great patience, great forgiveness, great mercy, great grace, great allowance, great tolerance, great kindness and compassion, oh my gosh, if I am treating Cecilia the way that Jesus treats me, then what I am doing is you better believe I'm building a spiritual bond, because my wife is saying, oh my gosh, he's treating me better than I deserve. Why is that? Because Jesus treats us better than we deserve. We all fall short. We all deserve death. But Jesus, in His grace, God in His grace, through Jesus' work on the cross, forgives us. He loves us. He's compassionate towards us. He's kind. He gives us everything we need, even when we don't deserve it. And if we endeavor to treat our spouse the way that Jesus treats us, man, that is powerful. And our spouse is attracted to us spiritually. Now, very quickly, let me go back to the scripture I said before, John chapter 15, verse 5. Jesus says, I am the vine, you are the branches. Apart from me, you can do nothing. Or I like to break that into two words. Without me, you can do no thing. You cannot bear fruit without Jesus Christ being an intricate part of your life. Jesus must be intertwined with everything that you have going on in your life for you to bear fruit. You're going to have to be intertwined with Jesus to treat your mate the way that Jesus treats you. But when you do, you're going to find that you're going to develop a spiritual bond with your mate. And so I'm hopeful that this was helpful to you. We've got the emotional piece. We've got the physical piece. We've got the spiritual piece. Now, you may be saying, Kevin, I've kind of run off the road with one or two or maybe all three of these. Can I recover? Absolutely. You can recover if you are off track with the emotional part, the spiritual part, or the sexual part. It is much easier to stay on the road than it is to get back on the road. It's a whole lot less hazardous. However, you can do it. So I want to encourage you. Wherever you are right now, spiritually, emotionally, or sexually, you can recover. Things can get better, but you've got to commit yourself to saying, you know what? I want our marriage to be awesome a year from now. I want our marriage to be awesome 6 months from now. What do I have to do today to make that happen? One of the things that really keeps me faithful in my marriage is I keep in mind, I have this picture. I like to call it, it's the picture for my marriage. And let me describe it to you very quickly, and then we'll be finished. I see Cecilia and me older, yet still looking very good. She's still looking very nice. I see us sitting in a pair of rocking chairs on a porch in the mountains, and we're just looking at the mountain range, and we're just rocking in those chairs. Man, every time I imagine that, it does something to me. It's doing something to me right now. That is what helps keep me faithful in my marriage whenever I'm tempted. That is what helps me back down whenever I am upset and I just kind of feel like that I'm just really upset with her. Those are the things that just really help me to stay focused on the future, because I realize that, you know what? For me to get to those rocking chairs in the mountains years from now, I've got to make sure that I do what is required today to get to that place. And so that's what I want to tell you. I'm so excited for you because you're newlywed and you are at, all of marriage is exciting, but I think that the newlywed stage is so exciting, but it is also so pivotal because you have to make decisions now that are going to get you down the road years from now. And so thank you so much for listening. Let me pray for you very quickly before we close. Heavenly Father, I thank you for every husband and every wife who watched or listened to this webinar. Father, I pray that you'll give them the wisdom, give them the strength and the help to develop a sexual, emotional, and spiritual bond that is going to make their marriage great now and even greater in the future. I thank you, Lord, for being their help. In Christ's name, amen. Thank you so much for giving me this time to just speak to you and to pour into your life and pour into your marriage. And until next time, this is Kevin Bullard reminding you that marriage works. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.